everyone, it's Carissa Wiley. Thanks for joining me here on the My Favorite Things YouTube channel for another edition of Sparkle and Shine. Today we are going to take a look at some foil dip die cuts as well as some acrylic block watercoloring. That's my name for it as opposed to something else. I don't know. There may be an official name, but I don't know what it is. So I'm going to be using this Prayers Stamp and Die combo. And I did want to mention that if you are not a praying person, that's okay. My Favorite Things has so many combinations like this of the die cut word and the coordinating stamp set. So you could change this up for any occasion. So we're going to start out by creating some backdrops for the die cut words today. And I'm using some distress inks and an acrylic block here, and I'm just pressing the ink onto the acrylic block into kind of some stripes here. I'm using Tattered Rose, Worn Lipstick, Cracked Pistachio, and Peacock Feathers for this first one. And you can see I'm just pressing the ink onto that block. There's no special technique here. You just push it on there. And then I'm going to use a spray bottle to get this ink really moving. You're going to see the ink kind of bead up on that acrylic block. And once I have that ink kind of fluid and moving, I'm going to turn this over and press the block onto a piece of Tim Holtz watercolor cardstock. Then I'm just going to let it sit there. I'm going to give the paper some time to absorb some of that water and the ink before I lift the acrylic block off of that watercolor cardstock. So once I've let it set for a little bit, I'm going to pull the acrylic block straight up. You can see I have kind of an ugly area there in the middle. That's okay. I'm going to just use a dry paper towel and sop up some of that extra ink there. I don't want anything to kind of create mud here, so I can pick it up and kind of move the ink around just by tilting the paper. But if you run into some areas that you really are just like, ugh, that's ugly, you can just use a dry, clean paper towel to kind of blot up some of the extra water and ink. And that's going to keep that ink from moving other places as well. Now on this first one, I kind of felt like I wanted some of those colors to be more intense. So I inked up my block again, just like I did before. And then I'm going to spray it with my spritzer bottle again. Now the thing I did want to note is in the first time I did this, I had my block on top of my watercolor cardstock while I was spritzing it. Bad idea. That watercolor cardstock you can see is bowing up, and that's going to create some problems with my ink moving maybe into some places that we don't want it to. So you might want to spritz your block on away from your watercolor cardstock. So you can see I repeated the same process on this same background. I'm blotting up some of the areas where I don't like it. And then I can either heat set this with my heat tool or I can set it aside and let it dry. Now, because it takes me a while to kind of get things right, and because I wanted to make several cards, I'm going to do this again. But this time I've switched out my peacock feathers for evergreen bough. And I'm going to put my two lightest colors on the ends of the block. So I have cracked pistachio and then evergreen bough. Then I will put the worn lipstick above the evergreen bough, and I'll finish off with the tattered rose. Now you're going to see here that I actually picked up a little bit of that evergreen bough on my worn lipstick little ink pad, mini ink cube here. That's okay. I'm just going to rub it on a piece of scratch paper until all of that evergreen bough is gone and my ink pad is like new. And then I'll finish off with the tattered rose here. And this is just a scrap piece of cardstock that I'm spritzing on top of here. But I'm going to give that a nice fine mist, maybe about 4 to 5 mists, just depending on how fluid you want your ink to be. And then I'm going to take this over to my watercolor cardstock. And once again, I'm just going to press that onto the watercolor cardstock and I'm going to let it sit. I don't need any sort of weight on top of this. I'm just kind of letting it sit. I'm being as patient as I possibly can because I'm a super impatient person. And then I'm going to lift it straight off. And once again, if there's any areas where I'm not liking where the ink is kind of going, I can blot it up with a paper towel. This time I actually took and I spritzed a little more water onto the ink that was already on the cardstock just to kind of fill in some of the gaps where I felt like it was a little, I don't know, it just looked gappy. Is that a word? And then once I got it where I wanted it, I went ahead and set that with a heat tool. Now I'm going to show you this one more time. I'm not changing up the colors here. I'm just doing this again. This is a great, quick and easy way to make some watercolor backdrops that are kind of contained into an area. They make a really good kind of backdrop for just simple die cut images, or even for little critters or something like that. I think they are easy to knock out. It gives you a beautiful result in the end. And if you can be patient and just let that sit, you get better results. So I'm just making a bunch of these, and then I'm going to set them aside and let them dry. You can see I have a couple there that I just used the evergreen bough and the cracked pistachio. I have one that I just used the tattered rose and the worn lipstick. And some of the ones towards the bottom left that look a little grainier, I used less water on those. So you can get really different looks. Now I'm taking this background and the magic mandala die here, and I'm going to actually deboss this die into the watercolor cardstock. So I have my cutting plate and then a rubber embossing mat, and then my paper, the die, and the rest of my die cutting sandwich. And you would have to look up your machine to see how you would kind of set this up, but basically you're going to set it up like you're embossing, but you're going to use a rubber mat instead. And that just keeps the die from cutting all the way through that cardstock. And you can see I was left with a beautiful debossed image. And I went ahead and used my Prayers die to die cut some Neenah Solar White 110-pound cardstock. So now we're going to do the little foil dipping technique. That's just kind of what I call it. I'm taking that die cut and I'm placing it back into the negative portion just to give it some stability. And then I'm taking a Zig 2-way glue pen and I'm kind of just flicking glue along the bottom of this die cut. Now the glue here is important. You want something that's going to dry tacky, and I happen to know that this glue does. So I'm just kind of creating a dry brushed effect along the bottom of this die cut. And then I'm going to pop it out of the negative space because I don't want it to dry in that negative space. I've had that happen before. It's not really super easy to pop out. Now, once that glue has dried and it's tacky, I'm going to place a scrap piece of foil over the top. I'm going to press it down, and then I'm going to run it through my die cut machine just to give it some pressure. And you can see when I remove this die cut from the foil, I have that really cool kind of rough foil dipped effect along the bottom of this die. It's just something to kind of dress it up. You could also do this with some glitter or different colors of foil. It gives you some really beautiful effects. But keep in mind, it's not a perfect straight line. If you wanted something like that, you could use like a stick-it adhesive along the bottom of the die to give you a nice, really solid straight line across the die. Now I'm taking a bunch of these mini sentiments, or like the strip sentiments, and I'm mounting them on my MISTI tool. I'm going to stamp a bunch of these kind of supporting sentiments all at once so I can heat emboss them. I prepped the surface of my black cardstock using my powder tool, and I've inked that up in Versamark ink, and now I'm just stamping that onto the black cardstock. And I'm going to do this twice. This is going to give me a bunch of little sentiment strips that I can use on several cards because I am making a few today, and the extras I can just keep on hand for other cards in the future. I lined these up on each of the pink lines there on the MISTI grid. I skipped a line in between, so it's about every ½ inch that I put these sentiments. And now I'm coating them with some white embossing powder, and I'm heat setting them. So you can see I'm going to have a bunch of these little supporting sentiments. You could create an entire background like this as well. Today I'm just going to take them over to my trimmer and cut them into little sentiment strips. And I love this trimmer because I can see exactly where I'm trimming. And I trimmed out all of these, and I have a bunch of sentiments ready to go. Now I layered up this foil dip die cut with a layer of vellum behind it, kind of offset. Then I added some foam adhesive to the back, and I'm adhering that onto my watercolor panel here with the debossed mandala design in it. And then I placed my sentiment strip below that Prayers die cut. I added foam adhesive to the back of this card front panel, and then I placed it onto an ivory card base, and I added a few sparkling clear sequins just to give it a little bit of shine. And that completes my card for today. You can see I created several versions of this. I used some different mandala dies. I've also used some leaf dies on some of them just to kind of mix it up. And you could change the colors up on these and make some really beautiful backgrounds for your die cut words. And I love the way that foil accent on the bottom of these die cuts just gives it a little bit of shine, but still keeps the card kind of very soft overall because I used a champagne foil for this technique. Now I have a bunch of these prayers cards ready to go out. These are the kind of cards that I never tend to have on hand when I need them, but they're the kind of cards that kind of need to go out fast. And these make for great sympathy cards as well. Now you could also take these backgrounds and adhere your prayers die cut word right over the top. And then right before you send it out, you could add one of those sentiment strips that is appropriate for the occasion that you might be sending it for. So that's a great idea, and it would make a great gift set in that way too, where you could just kind of have the strips that you would add on right before you send it out. So here's a look at all the cards that I created today with the various debossed backgrounds and watercolored backgrounds. I love the way that these turned out. I hope you enjoyed these projects as well. As always, you can find links to the featured products used in these projects in the description at YouTube, so be sure to check that out. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to the My Favorite Things YouTube channel so you won't miss any of these fabulous card making and paper crafting video tutorials. Thanks for watching, thanks for joining me and hanging out with me, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day.